we're beginning with bad news, and I want to just come back to that idea of restory, restory. And what we're also doing here is we're naming what I call unsuha. Unsuha is the phenomenon of unsustainable happiness. It's a happiness trap where our attempts to do things that make us happier actually threaten our world and also have an impact on increasing depression. And it's interesting that we live at a time where many aspects of our world are becoming scary and depressing. A survey of 10,000 young people found that more than half of them agreed with the statement, humanity is doomed. And, that might feel like, oh, well, that's kind of gloomy. But if that's the background, has a huge impact on our collective psychology. And so, how do we move away to a different approach to happiness? An approach to happiness where there may be benefits in the short term, but in a way that put out longer term ripples of benefit. And it's interesting, this term sustainable happiness, we can use that in different ways. So, sustainable happiness, some people see that's happiness that lasts a long time. And we'll come on to that kind of background buoyancy of contentment that you can carry into your life, and that the lasting sense of positive mood. But there's also happiness that is sustainable, an approach to happiness that is sustainable ecologically in terms of the impact on the planet. And so what we're looking at is saying, how do we, in this time that we've got together, support a shift to being a life that's more satisfying, sustainable, and socially transformative? It's about how we take part in a shift in how we have a good life, a satisfying life, but in a way that is not only just good for ourselves, but also sends out positive ripples to other people in our world. I'm seeing there's some comments there in the chat window, and I just wonder whether there's anything that you'd like to bring in here, Madeline, in terms of what people are saying.
People were reflecting on some of their own examples of Ansuha and the short term that doesn't pan out so well in the longer term. Um, and they were very relatable examples of like sugary food, partying, chocolate, wandering, or like avoiding things to just favor Netflix, or making too many social plans. I think they're things that a lot of us could relate with. And then Grace has just said that I'd like to build this more into my yoga teaching, which I think is an amazing idea.
I wonder what would it be like if we saw, lots of people who do yoga also do Tai Chi or also meditate, and that we were to add Suha to the rich portfolio of well-being practices out there. And I think what's different about Suha is that it's a modern hybrid where a lot of what's going on is an inner shift, but there's an outer movement too. We'll touch on this, but in a way where part of the shift is actually in the story, a shift in the story that we feel part of, and the story of what happiness is about. And I just to say, I love chocolate, and I eat it more than I feel I should. But a phrase that I found so helpful when working in addictions recovery was find the want behind the should. So this is not a kind of, Suha is not about a kind of puritanism that's about stealing away all sources of joy. It's about strengthening our capacity to find other pathways to a satisfying life that have positive impact, not just on our own lives, but also on other people in our world. So that's the story that we want to tell. And right at the heart of it is a shift in how we think about happiness, rather than this idea of a picture of happiness, which is me plus the things that make me happy. And that if I don't have the things that make me happy, then it's not a happy picture. And the thing about this picture model is that bad news is unwelcome. It's seen as a threat to happiness. If you bring up topics like climate change or mass extinction or the huge inequalities that exist in our world, you're seen as a bit of a downer. You're seen as someone who's like a threat to the community of happiness. And you know, you might, I don't know if any of you experience this, you might kind of get scowled at or seen as kind of as unwelcome topics of conversation. Um, and that can lead to issues like climate change being sort of airbrushed out of view. Now, stories, I don't know how many of you love stories or have examples of stories that you love that begin with absolute disaster, that begin with something threatening the community, threatening the world, or begin with a kind of a dismal start. I just think of Harry Potter here, Cupboard Under the Stairs. That, you know, there are a lot of mean, ghastly things going on in many major stories. But what good stories have is a rising to the challenge by the central characters. Not always straight away, there may be a bit of kind of mixed feelings about it, but there's a rising to the challenge to a plot that rings true with people's heart. There's kind of heartfelt plots. It matters, the stakes are high. And good stories have turning points as well. And so I want to bring in this idea of a story of happiness has a rich plot, has a sense of purpose, and we're going to be looking at, well, how do we strengthen that? And so here's an idea. As well as changing how we view happiness and having a story of happiness, we're also going to change where we look for treasure. So rather than this idea of treasure being gold and jewels and having more of that, I'm going to ask you here, um, what do you value, even treasure, in the landscape of your heart and mind? You know, when you kind of think, you know, what goes on inside me? What happens inside you? And if you kind of think of this inner landscape as somewhere where you have choices about what you grow, what you give attention to, what you draw out, what would you like to grow in your mind and heart? And is anything that you can grow more valuable to you than gold? So just inviting you to write in the chat window, what can you grow in your mind and heart that's more valuable to you than gold? Or even if you're not so sure about that, it's certainly valuable enough that you'd like to grow it. What kinds of things come up, Madeline? Anything yet? Or you might have some thoughts yourself.
Yeah, I was just typing in my thoughts, but yeah, it's coming up. Love, relationships, family, friends, colleagues, peace, happiness, real presence and connection with nature, resilience, insight and perspective, wisdom, caring, faith in my own good intentions when others cannot understand me.
I love that. I love what I'm hearing. And I'm guessing that a number of you hearing this, you'll find that these things ring true for you too. There's lots of things in our heart and mind that are so precious that we'd love to find ways to help them happen more. And taking in, you know, presence, connection, perspective, peace, sense of love, and I think also belonging, sense of belonging. And I'm going to add in there also purpose, a sense of purpose, that actually people who have lots of gold but don't have these things that we've been describing here may feel a kind of inner impoverishment. They may feel their lives are empty, and you probably can think of lots of people who had all the tick boxes of the things that you need for a picture of happiness, but ended up being extremely miserable. You know, it's a common thing that can happen. So what I want to pick up on purpose particularly because there's been a lot of research about purpose and the benefits it brings, purpose in life, that people who have stronger purpose in life tend to be happier, tend to have stronger personal relationships, but there's also very significant health gains. They actually have lower all-cause mortality, improved health, they sleep better, they've got less risk of Alzheimer's disease, better mental health, better heart health, healthier habits, and they tend to do better in their careers as well. And I'm just wondering, like, What if there were a well-being practice that you could do, we could do in just about 15 minutes a day that helped us grow treasure inside ourselves, and not just inside ourselves, but also between ourselves. I think relationships is such a important treasure, and that's more like between people. There's aspects of it inside people, but also helped us strengthen our sense of purpose in life. Help protect our mental health, particularly when things feel scary or overwhelming. That acknowledge the climate crisis and other bigger picture challenges we face, that can also not be too complicated and may even be quite fun, that could help our lives become more satisfying, sustainable, and socially transformative. And I want to bring in the idea of eco-psychosocial design. And what I mean by that sounds a long phrase, eco-psychosocial design, or perhaps we can say permaculture design for the inner landscape. Is design is where you think about an area and you think about what you'd like to happen there, and then you develop a design that helps that happen. So I'm thinking about well-being practices, and I've been involved in the well-being movement for 40 years. My first degree in 1983 combined medicine and psychology, and I trained as a medical doctor. But even back in 1983, I was part of a group of medical students that set up a whole program around teaching self-help practices and a holistic approach that looked at not just personal well-being but also collective well-being. This is a thread I've been following for a long time, and I was thinking like I teach positive psychology, and there's lots about it that I absolutely love, but it also feels like it misses a lot. It misses a lot of how does it help us respond to what's happening in the world with issues around climate change. And that's why I've taken up as a kind of hobby interviewing people, speaking to people about Suha, and asking for help to design this well-being practice and saying what would need to happen. And you here now, you're part of this, I might call it the Project Suha. Project Suha is we're holding the question, how do we develop a well-being practice that not just supports ourselves, but also supports our ability to contribute to our world, that might put out positive ripples, that just taking part in this practice, that we're also contributing to a larger movement of change.